is Our Pioneers and Neighbours. I'm Olga Ruskin. My special guest today is Bob Neal of West Vancouver, who is Assistant Field Engineer in the construction of the Cleveland Dam, one of the North Shore's major scenic attractions and the source of Vancouver's water supply. First of all, Bob, the dam is on the Capilano River, but it's called the Cleveland Dam. Now, why is that?
It was named after the first commissioner of the Greater Vancouver Water Board, and so they commemorated him by naming the dam after him. After completion, Dr. Cleveland.
Dr. Cleveland. I believe there's a plaque there.
Yes, there's a plaque put up there in 1956.
Yes. Well, tell me, why did Vancouver need a dam?
Well, the city was growing and they didn't have adequate water supply. Their source was up above the present dam, about several miles up, and it was just two pipes put straight into the river, and they had very little protection. And in the wintertime, when it would flood, and they'd have a lot of debris come in, and that was quite a problem, keeping the pipes clear. But the pipes were inadequate for that amount of water for Vancouver.
And also then people in Vancouver would have a dirty water supply, would they? Or?
Yes, it would. That's true. It wouldn't
with the
always
debris.
Run clear. Yes, it wouldn't always. When you get a flood, you get sediment into the water supply.
Well, I think this picture perhaps explains something about this. This is at the source of the
yes,
the
that's
old...
the source of the old intake, and that's the way the pipes came right into the river, and that was their main source of water.
And I guess today this is all flooded then.
That's all flooded. The present dam is flooded.
Will you tell me a little bit about the background of this area? It has an interesting historic
background. The Capilano Timber Company was in there, and they logged there extensively up until 1929, 1930. And they had really prime timber in there, very large spruce. And they put in a railroad from the tidewater from North Vancouver, and the railroad ran right up to the Capilano Dam Center, right up to where the old intake was.
So the old intake used to have some fine logging.
It had wonderful timber, yes.
Wonderful timber.
Yeah, one of the better stands of timber in the British Empire.
Isn't that interesting? We don't sort of, it's hard to associate that area with a logging firm. Well, this is a delightful photograph of a train that
yes, it was one of their locomotives that hauled the logs out.
Up there.
Yes.
Yeah. And you were telling me that remnants of the railway can still be seen.
Yes, down at Rabbit Lane on British Properties, you can still see the old bed of the old railroad, and some of the old trestles probably are still there standing. Yeah. The timber's pretty well gone, but you can still
sort of little traces here and there of the old railway. And I guess the railway, or I should say the logging company, had to go because the water...
Oh, that's right. Yes, they had to move out of there because, well, they had practically all the logs taken out that they wanted, but still the water board wanted to get going with their new dam, so they had to have the Capilano timber out of there before they could start.
Well, the other interesting thing is that where the dam is today, there used to be other structures in the past.
Yes, that's right. There used to be Taunton House School for girls right on that dam site.
Right where the dam is today.
Right where the dam is today, and they had a swinging bridge at something similar to the bridge that's at the Narrows now, and that was quite a tourist attraction.
So just as it is today, in the past it was a tourist attraction. Yes. Well, we have here a picture of the building in which the school was housed in.
Yes, that's
the way it looked.
Yes,
and it was still there.
It was there when we first started the contract, and we had to tear it down.
Well, this apparently was the old Pete Larson's Canyon View Hotel. Then it became the school.
Yes.
Yes. I understand from talking to the North Shore Museum and Archives, they don't have a picture of the Canyon View Hotel as Taunton House School, but it would be rather interesting to see
yes, it would be.
People or girls outside the school there. Well, what about the actual site itself? You were saying there was a suspension bridge there in the past. It's a very deep part of the canyon.
Yes, very deep. It's very narrow and very deep. It's about 325 feet deep from the top of the present dam to the bottom, and it was very narrow. And
it was a spot, perhaps, that
they thought it was an ideal spot for the dam, and that was why it was chosen.
Well, how did you become involved in the construction?
Well, I had just left a job up in Bridge River with the Swinigan Engineering Company, and instead of going back east, I found out that they wanted help with the Greater Vancouver Water Board, so I came with the Greater Vancouver Water Board.
So that's how it started, was through your association with the Water Board. Well, you did some work for them in Vancouver before you went on this project.
We started and we did a lot of pipe installation, and we drove a tunnel under 33rd into Little Mountain. That reservoir could never be drained, and the water that used to come from the Capilina, from the old intake, used to be the odd fish used to get into that reservoir, and so when we drained that reservoir with the tunnel, it was quite a lot of fish that was taken out.
It's quite amazing. Was it salmon?
Yeah, well, it's trout.
Trout,
yes.
So that had traveled all that
that way, yes.
And through pipes?
Pipes,
into the reservoir?
Into the reservoir, yes.
So you had done some work then on the water supply in Vancouver?
In Vancouver, then some of the major pipelines.
Yeah.
And a couple of tunnels.
Tunnels, yes. Yeah. These tunnels are quite big, I understand, in Vancouver.
We put a tunnel in for water for West Vancouver, so we had to go underneath the Capilina River and come up on the east bank and tap into the Capilina water main. That was main supply for West Vancouver.
For West Van?
Yes.
How big was this tunnel, by the way?
That tunnel was about, we put in a 54-inch diameter pipe in that tunnel, and it went along Mathers to about 27th Street from Capilina.
Well, and that would be around what year?
Oh, that would be before we built the dam. That would be 48, 49.
Around 48, yes.
49.
When did work begin on the Capilano? I keep saying Capilano Dam, it's the Cleveland Dam.
Cleveland Dam. Well, I went up there in 50. They let the contract out to American Engineering Company, the United States Bureau of Reclamation. They designed it. And one of the board engineers went down to Denver for a few days and helped with the specifications. And so that's what the dam was built by the Board of Reclamation drawings. And
this would be, it's then the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation
yes.
was like a consulting firm.
They were a consultant. They did dams practically all over the world.
Did they do the Colorado Dam?
Yes, they did the Grand Shasta dams and Grand Coulee dams. And
yes. Now, why would Dr. Cleveland want, well, how did American interests get involved then?
Well, they thought they'd like to go to the top engineering company that was doing that type of work.
So, and they were the top.
They were, yes.
They were the
traveled
tops
all
then.
over, yes.
Yes. Now, what was your specific job?
Well, I came there and I was to be the field engineer doing the surveying work, and they were going to get a bureau man from the United States Bureau of Reclamation. He was going to be the top field engineer, and never quite worked out that way. We had two engineers, and the first chap that came up, he couldn't stay because of his wife. He had to go back, and then they sent another engineer from the Bureau, and he'd lose his seniority who came up here, so he had to leave. So we ended up with a chap from the BCI, British Columbia Engineering. They were doing the Kitimat job, and he came, and he was
He was the...
He was with the...
With there, yeah.
board.
So you did some surveying and layout.
Yeah, and then the first job was to take these plans that had came from Denver and lay out the axis of the dam, and then I laid out the flow line. After I finished the tunnels, I laid out the flow line. That was where the lake was going to originally come to, and that was where, when I found that young boy.
Yes, well, that was a very dramatic incident, wasn't it? And as, you had a book here with some clippings dealing with your involvement in the Capilano or Cleveland Dam, and tell us about that.
Well, the young boy, he's 12 years old, he's a Boy Scout, he's a leader of the Boy Scout in Kingsway, and he told his parents he was going to go hiking up Grouse Mountain on a Sunday, and instead of going Grouse Mountain, he went to Hollyburn, and it was very heavy fog in the middle of January, and he got lost coming down. And I happened to be out on a Wednesday. He got lost on a Sunday, and they're looking up Grouse Mountain for him and couldn't find him, and so they're just about ready to give up. And on Wednesday, I found him at the foot of Capilano Railroad, and he was just had died when I found him.
Oh, that's very
He was 12
tragic.
years old. Yeah, he didn't have enough strength to get into the...
Get in any further.
If he could have gone another mile, he'd have been home free.
Well, the headlines here say, "Find Vancouver Boy Dead 1 mile from safety." Yes, that was a story that was carried across Canada, too. Well, here's an interesting photograph of you. I guess we were just beginning the job here.
Yes, that was the president, that was commissioner then of the water board, Dr. Gilbert.
Mr. Gilbert. Yeah, Mr. Gilbert, yeah, and yourself.
Yeah.
And you're sort of surveying the work at hand.
Yeah, we're just doing the clearing then.
Yes. Well, there must have been a lot of people involved in the both in the engineering.
Yes, well, we had a lot of measurements to do. Everything was done by cubic volume, and there's a lot of surveying to do and a lot of inspection. So we ended up with a big drafting staff and a field engineering staff.
Well, I have a photograph here that says Capilano Concentration Camp.
Yes,
It's the staff,
that was the staff that was required to do that job.
You must have felt very isolated
Yes,
there when you began that. Well, what did the area look like when you first came? Maybe that's...
It was heavily wooded, and just a road up to the intake. Outside that, there was second growth timber. Capilano had taken the first growth all out, but it was mostly second growth timber. And the contract was let to an American contractor. He had the low bid, so they went in and did the clearing.
Oh, so it was an American group
And
there again.
he brought in this steel ball, about 7.5-foot diameter steel ball, and he'd put it in behind the heavy growth, and then he'd start pulling that ball with winches, and the momentum of that ball would knock the trees over.
Well, this was then the way it looked. I'm referring here to a report you made on this, and we'll look through the photographs because they tell a lot about the actual work. So this was this scene that first greeted you.
Yes, that's right. The water going through the present canyon.
Yes, and there was the suspension bridge at the top. That was the old suspension.
The old suspension bridge.
And then the construction people put in a second.
They took out the old bridge and put in their own bridge.
Yes. Well, this ball was quite a thing. It must have been quite enormous.
Yes, about 7.5-foot diameter.
7.5-foot diameter. Yes. And it just sort of went through
and got momentum going, and it would knock all the trees down up to about 2.5-foot diameter.
What is this photograph?
That was when we excavated to the very bottom, got all the material out, and we hit the soft gouge right in the bottom, and it didn't bother us. We drilled, and it didn't accept any cement.
Well, here's another photograph of that.
Was, yes, when we had the bottom excavated and were ready pouring concrete in the bottom.
Now, there's no water in this area.
We had to divert the river, so we had to drive a 31-foot diameter tunnel to divert the river. So the river was in the tunnel. So then that left access to build the dam.
Yes, because the people of Vancouver and West Vancouver, everywhere, still needed to have their water supply.
Yes.
While this was all being
that's right. Yes.
worked on.
Yes.
Well, this is a rather dramatic picture of the diversion
Yes,
tunnel.
diversion tunnel. Yes.
And so through this tunnel, the water flowed while
in. Yes, while we could excavate.
Well, it looks really quite. It's quite a big one, and it was blasting, was it?
Yeah, well, it's just
of course.
Very hard rock, granite and diorite rock. And,
yes.
Yeah.
And this picture here?
That's the south end of the tunnel, as it was, yes.
And this tunnel still remains today.
Oh, yes, yes, we have 2 valves inside the center of that tunnel.
But the water doesn't flow through it?
No, but if they wanted to drain that lake, they could go inside and open these valves, or what they call 2 54-inch Hallbunger valves, and they can open the valves, and that'll help drain the lake.
So it's there as sort of a, they've kept it as a precautionary measure.
Right,
yes. Well, we've got some people in the tunnel
here.
Yes,
that's the miners that drove the tunnel.
Through. Well, you get an idea of the size of the tunnel from the scale of their figures against there. Well, I have a picture here of a cement plant perched precariously on the side of the
yes, the contract was let to an American contractor. He had the low bid, and seeing that he worked with the Bureau of Reclamation, a lot of his equipment he was familiar with, and so he brought up his cement plant and put that right on the canyon.
So there it was, perched on the side.
Yes.
And it was a very large cement plant.
Yes, it was a large one. He could turn out 2 cubic yards at one time.
And it was all dismantled afterwards.
Oh yes, it was taken down and dismantled.
Well, in this photograph we see some other equipment being used. What is that for?
That's when he was excavating the rock down off the walls of the canyon. Then he dropped that bucket down, and then he'd load into that with the trucks. He had coring trucks there to load into that skyline, and that would pull it up and dump it upstream.
Well, the trees, of course, were removed.
Yeah, the trees were removed, and well, right on that lip, there was very few trees right in the canyon wall, just small growth there.
Small growth.
Right
so there was an awful lot of goings-on in the canyon in those days.
Yeah.
How many men worked on
the contract?
Well, perhaps just on site there.
On site, well, the contractor would have, he had 3 shifts working. Day, afternoon, and graveyard shift, and the day shift would be about 100 to 150 men.
100 and 150 men?
Yes.
Was there a construction camp?
No, he built an office, but there's no camp. Most of the people lived in the city.
In the city.
Or North Vancouver.
Or in North Van, yes. Well, we have here a wide picture.
Yes,
a lot of detail.
This is after a strip getting ready for concrete down below, and they're stripping here to bedrock.
So on the left-hand side would be where the left
This is
part, on the lower
This is
left.
the west side.
Yes.
And this is the east side.
And so the bridge in the middle.
And that was the bridge that the contractor had to get his people across.
Yes, and I guess would that today be where you walk across?
Well, the dam is right above that, right there, on that very center line.
Is above the walk on the.
Yes.
Right. Were there any problems with the site?
Yes, we had problems with the rock. It was drilled, in the early 50s, I think it was, and there wasn't enough information on the drill holes, especially where we wanted it, and that was on what we call the east abutment. On the west abutment, there's no problem at all. Our core wall's tied right into bedrock, and there's no problem. But on this east abutment, we didn't have any bedrock, and it went right, as the canyon walls came up the rock, and then it dropped right down. And we had where we wanted to tie in the core wall, we didn't have any bedrock.
So you need bedrock and construction to sort of fasten the structure down.
So what had to be done was an impervious blanket was put up in front of the dam.
An impervious blanket. Now, what is that?
That was made out of material that you had to, best material that you could find on site, and the best material that we could find was glacial till. And we had that compacted in 6-inch layers with pneumatic rollers. And then in front of it, we had that protected with riprap. And we brought that right up to the face of the dam. And then, and then we had a big drilling job trying to solidify this material that we didn't have bedrock. So
around the east abutment.
On this east abutment. So we drove a tunnel in over several hundred feet, and it was in straight sand, and we excavated 2 small shafts. And the first shaft we found bedrock. It was fairly deep. It was going down. Then we went another 100 feet ahead and then excavated the second shaft and found the bedrock was practically going right down to sea level. So there wasn't any bedrock, so we relied on grouting. So we filled up the tunnels, and then we went on the surface up on top, and then we did what they call grouting, pressure grouting from the surface. So we pressure grouted every 5 feet along that percolation line.
And so we hope it'll hold.
Well, all abutments leak. All these big abutments leak to a certain extent, but there isn't any problem if they leak, if they're clean water that runs through. But once they start carrying material, that's when you got to really watch out. So when we filled this dam up first, there was a silt coming in, and we had an exploration tunnel down to the right, and it showed that it was quite concerning there first couple of days. There was a lot of silt moved, and then it gradually tapered off. So the grout table really helped a lot, but probably there should be more exploration work done, because it's been there now since 1956, so it's been there.
Maybe time to
take another look, because there is a weakness through this zone here,
around the,
and it could cause problems.
Could cause such as?
Well, if you get, hard to say what can happen. You rely on your blanket upstream, and then eventually you can get around your blanket, because your blanket could only go so far up, and you could get a leak developing on the outside of the blanket, and it could follow the path, and then.
Well, the school, just to sort of, while we're in that area, the school was on the lower left-hand.
The school just up there.
By the east, where the east abutment is.
Yeah, right where they're present.
Well,
Shack is.
in our remaining time, we'll just sort of quickly take a look at the remaining aspects here of the construction.
Yeah,
Bob, what is this
That's
here?
pouring the first concrete, and it's the men down there cleaning it. Went down there with sponges and cleaned all the little debris.
So they had to really do a cleanup job.
Yeah, they had to do a real cleanup job, and then that was pouring the concrete.
Well,
and that's pouring the concrete.
Pouring the concrete. Now, there must have been an awful lot of concrete used.
Yes, and it was done in 5-foot lifts, and every 5-foot lift was water-cooled. So we had thin-wall tubing inside the concrete on every 5-foot lift.
That's right. We see the tubing there to cool. And how long did it take to cool the concrete?
Well, we watched it very carefully with thermometers. So inside of 3 days, it would be down to about 70 degrees, 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
3 days, though?
Yes, because when it was placed, it was around 90.
And here we have
That's it there. It's coming up every
you're building the dam.
Every 5 feet,
Yes.
And the contraction joints are every 50 foot horizontally.
Yes. Well, here we just, towards the end of the report, you put in another picture of
that was clearing with the ball, getting ready to push those timber down.
That was really quite amazing.
Yes, and that's it. After 15 minutes, that's what it left.
It looked like it took only 15 minutes to do all.
Several acres, yes.
Well, that was quite a.
Yes.
Has that technique been used elsewhere?
Yes, the contractor used it successfully down at the Hungry Horse Dam in Montana.
The Hungry Horse?
It's a Bureau reclamation job that was just completed at that time, and he came up with the ball. But in Hungry Horse, the timber isn't anything like the heavy timber here. But he worked it successfully here, and then after he'd finished this job here, he went up and cleared the Kitimat site with it. But it has a limitation. If the trees get too big, it just wouldn't handle them. But up to about 2 foot, 18-inch diameter to 2 foot trees, second growth, it could handle it quite easily.
Well, there's another rather dramatic photograph here. I guess this this area here, I guess, still we're in the earlier construction.
Yes.
I thought it
That's the
shows the extensive sort of land works there, doesn't it?
Yes, clearing.
And so the dam itself is how big?
Dam is about
how tall?
It's about 325 feet in height,
and
it goes on each side of the length. I guess it's just over 900 feet.
Mm-hmm. When was it finished?
It was finished in 1955, 56.
And was there a great big celebration when it ended?
Well, it came gradually. The crew got smaller and smaller, and it gradually just ended. And no, there wasn't any big
There wasn't any sort of final dedication.
Oh, yes, and we had a dinner due down at Capilano Canyon Gardens for the
staff.
For the staff.
But Dr. Cleveland had meanwhile passed away.
He had passed away, and then his Cleveland, Mr. Cleveland, he passed away 6 weeks after. He was appointed commissioner, and with Theo Barry, they were joint commissioners then, and so Mr. Gilbert didn't, well, he passed away just about 6 weeks after Dr. Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a sort of a before and after photograph I thought would be interesting to see. And
yes, that's,
could you just comment on this?
Yeah, that's the present before we went into there, and that's the bridge, the old bridge was a tourist attraction, and the dam went up a little higher than the present bridge to 325
Where that
feet.
Black arrow is.
From the bottom.
Yes,
so that's what we had to excavate. It's all that material
there. So this is sort of the before shot.
Yes.
And we have here.
That's the finished.
This is the finished product
yes.
in 1954.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Bob, what did you do after all this? This was sort of an exciting project. What did you do after?
After the Cleveland
After this.
Oh, I did just work with the board on similar or smaller jobs, and then I left the board and I went to work for consulting engineers, 2 different companies.
And so now you're retired.
Yes, I'm retired.
And you're doing some garden engineering.
Yes, right.
Well, just in looking back over the project, what do you think was your sort of most interesting memory of it?
Of the Cleveland Dam?
Yes, is there any particular highlight?
They are all correlated in. It was...
it was all sort of a big project then.
Yes, it just seemed to just keep you busy looking from one end to the other.
Yes, it was a busy job.
Yes.
It sort of took a lot of time.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you very, very much, Bob, for coming and sharing with us your background and experience on the Cleveland Dam.
I'm very glad to help.
It's an important part of our scenery here today, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
The dam has replaced what remained before, the Taunton House School, the swinging bridge. And by the way, was there the other swinging bridge which remains today, was it there at this time?
That bridge, yes, that was there for a long time.
So there were two swinging
bridges, yes.
Yes.
And they're very similar constructed.
Thank you again very much, Bob Neal, for coming and speaking to us.
Thank you.
This has been Our Pioneers and Neighbors. My guest today has been Bob Neal of West Vancouver, Assistant Field Engineer to the Cleveland Dam. I'm Olga Ruskin.